Yeah, thank you for that introduction. And my ego has been growing throughout the conference as we've had speaker after speaker down in the main auditorium talk about the importance of data in ag and how it's going to affect us as farmers. So it's my head's been growing a bit. So it's great to come and share more with you now about it and try and get a bit of an understanding. I'm sure the industry is talking about it a lot, but for us on the ground trying to grow stuff or feed animals, what does that mean for us? Of course, big thanks to firstly my family who are in the back row. We had Tallulah halfway through my Nuffield travels, so came home from the GFP, had her a few weeks later, and a few weeks after that went off travelling again. So a bit like Andrew in our first presentation today, it's been a big couple of years. Also, thanks to my investor, the Rural Finance Corporation in Victoria. They invest a lot of money in young people, young farmers in agriculture. Not just myself, they have quite a scholarship program and quite a program of investing in young people in ag, and we certainly all benefit from it. And this is, as you keep hearing over and over in these presentations, it's just an amazing thing. Yeah, so farming in Eckniver in Victoria, a lot of people wouldn't know necessarily where that is, so we're sort of 3.5 hours drive southeast of here, nearly halfway between here and Melbourne. That's what the place looks like. Yeah, 2,500 hectares, yeah, and yeah, focusing, as was said in the introduction, on our domestic markets. But on my travels, we started out with our Contemporary Scholars Conference in France. The Global Focus Program was through England, the USA, being Washington DC and California, then down to CIMMYT in Mexico, and then the focus of our trip was Brazil, before finishing up going through New Zealand on the way home. For my personal study after that, I started out at the European Conference on Precision Agriculture in Israel, and before returning to England, Brazil and the USA and having a brief trip up into Canada. And for that personal study, I guess these were the 4 questions I was really trying to get a better understanding on, get a bit of a handle on, focusing, I guess, particularly on the 2 in the middle. And can we use data to manage our farms better, to make more profitable decisions, yeah, get better outcomes in our business, and also, and you've heard a bit about it in these sessions today, this and these large corporates and new companies coming into agriculture, trying to access the data that we create in our businesses, and why do they care? Why does this company from the middle of America care what I'm doing on my farm in Australia? It's a bit of a hard one, I think, for us to get our head around. So trying to get a bit of a handle on that. So I arrive at this conference on precision agriculture in Israel, an amazing country I never imagined I'd get to visit, and if you get the chance, it's nowhere near as bad as what you see on the news. And an Israeli professor from a university there suggested that we're living through the 3rd revolution, that there have been 3 revolutions in the way that humans live and work, and each of them have had big impacts on us here in agriculture. Of course, the first one was the agrarian revolution, where our ancestors stopped being hunter-gatherers, wandering the earth, fishing, foraging through bushes, and started putting down roots, living in the one spot and farming. And then, of course, there's the one we're more familiar with, the Industrial Revolution, where better farming techniques enabled surplus food production, which meant that people could move into cities and then gain work and employment in factories and building things. And that process, industrialisation, is still ongoing in the developing world today. And this professor suggested that we're living through the 3rd one here, like as we speak in our current time, being the information revolution, information data, call it what you will. That this idea that, and it's certainly happening here in the Australian economy, where we're moving away from things we produce, physical goods, factories, manufacturing, etc., and suggesting that what's important now is what you know, the information you have, how you can access it, and the expertise you have in doing what you do. And we certainly see that, as I said, here in Australia with moving to our services economy. And all through time we see these profound impacts on agriculture, less people working in ag and more people moving into other sectors of our economy. Pretty interesting perspective to get started out with. The best definition I had of big data, because everyone asks what is it, I think it's a bit of a buzzword, but not always well defined. But I think for us in a farming context, I got this definition from a Midwestern University professor who said big data is more of a capability than it is a thing. Is the ability to extract information and insights where it was previously economically and or technically impossible to do so. The key thing to note here is that it is a new capability, and a realisation I had during my travels is that nobody is doing an excellent job of farm data collection and using it because it's so new. It's 5 years ago this was not being talked about. This was at once both very frustrating for me because I went off thinking, I'm going to find these great tools and it's going to be easier, but it's also exciting because it means we couldn't have predicted where we are now 5 years ago, and who knows where we'll be in 5 years' time. The tools will keep getting better, and there'll be new uses and developments for this stuff. So it's an exciting time. I also realised I sort of had two kind of subtopics going on here, and that was what we farmers can do on farm ourselves with the data that we collect, and this off-farm use, and that's, as I've said, these other companies that are trying to, provide products and services to farmers around data and mapping and all these things, and how they can help us and what's happening with our data off-farm. On farm, this is an example from my place of what we've been able to do after collecting yield data for a number of years. This is a 4-year, I guess, a performance graph of our just one paddock on our farm. So it's 4 years of yield data stacked on top of each other. Each point in the field is given a percentage value of the field average for that year, and then this is an average of those 4 averages. So giving us an understanding over time of which parts of our paddocks are performing really well and which ones perhaps aren't so good. And the thing I love about this map is, so the green bits, I'm not sure, it might be a bit hard to see, are sort of 130% to 150, and even the blue bits are even higher of the average over 4 years. Whereas the red and orange are down to 50%. So what does that mean? Nearly 3 times the production in the blue bits compared with the red on the same paddock, and that's consistent across a couple of really good years and a couple of not so good years. But my favourite thing about this is it's on a national highway. And the best, most productive bit of the whole paddock is right next to the highway. And so my friends drive past and they say, "Oh, Jonathan, that crop along that highway looks great." And yeah, half of it is. They don't need to know that. So that's just one small example anyway of what we can do on farm ourselves, and indeed this is what other industries are doing, collecting data about things that they do in their business to get a better understanding of what's going on in their businesses. And so for us, obviously our businesses, our paddocks, and just getting, as the guy said, the John Deere guy said this morning, moving from an average approach to getting a lot more targeted with what we do. But I was also really fascinated by this off-farm use of technology, and and again, why are these big multinationals, many of them based overseas, why do they care what we're doing on farm? I did struggle for a while to get my head around it, but I did get a clue. Meeting at the Climate Corporation in St. Louis, and unlike the graphs we saw this morning with Australian yields and productivity flatlining, in the US Midwest where I was travelling, corn yields are still on the up and up. They're still getting great yield and productivity improvements over there. And 2 years ago, the first ever 500 bushel per acre crop was harvested. And that didn't mean much to me, so I did some voodoo maths on the calculator and came up with 31.4 tonnes per hectare. Now the US corn average is around 10.6. And so what's going on here? So with current genetics, farmers aren't getting anywhere near the level of productivity out of their seeds with their current practices. And what these companies don't understand is they know what's possible, they know their products intimately and how to get the best out of them, but they don't know what's going on the farm level and how to improve that and why we aren't seeing those same results in the field. An interesting example with in the US with corn perhaps, but what relevance does that have to here? Well, we grow a lot of durum out in the West Wimmera, and we host some of the breeding trials from the University of Adelaide. And the head breeder is found a bit similar with his durum. He's developed a great new variety that we're growing and are really happy with, and we can get a great yield with it here, maybe 6 tonnes per hectare. He sent it to South America to trial over there to compare to the durum varieties being grown in South America, and it went 9 tonnes per hectare in its first trial. So this shows us that current genetics already have amazing yield potential that aren't being completely filled. And these guys are trying to figure out why. I was fortunate enough to have meetings with all these up until 2 days ago, these two companies. Of course, Bayer just buying out Monsanto. And so they all had different approaches to their clients and what mechanisms they were using, but the guts of it was all the same. They were all trying to get a better handle of what we farmers are doing with their products on farm. A couple of notable quotes from as I said, from that meeting at the Climate Corporation was with a principal researcher in experimental science, and just on the side, like that's a Nuffield experience, isn't it? Like a farmer from the Wimmera getting to speak with, these really, really clever researchers in America. It's just one of those Nuffield experiences. Anyway, he said a couple of things that stood out to me. The first one, we need to give growers the best information in order to show them how to get the most out of their seeds. And a few minutes later in the conversation, he said, we can't assume that a farmer's investment in seed will be actualised on their own. And that's kind of sobering for us as farmers because we think we know what's going on in our patch. And if we go back to my map that I had up a couple of slides ago, we think we understand those areas, but maybe not to the extent that we could. So what's happening here is as well as investing in new genetics, which is important, these guys are also trying to figure out, agronomic packages to sell us and services to offer to get the most out of the products that they've already spent a lot of money and time developing. Now to add a word about startups. Another fascinating case, probably the most interesting thing I found on my trips, was these new companies, new ventures starting up with investment from outside of agriculture's traditional sources. Companies such as Facebook and Google and Amazon investing money into agriculture. Why do they care about agriculture? What do they know about agriculture? And having a meeting with the founder of a Silicon Valley startup, another kind of surreal Nuffield experience. The conversation was pretty interesting, and I said to this guy, "What is you?" He'd worked for Google formerly. What do you care about farms? What do you think? Why is Google interested? And he said the answer was pretty straightforward. He said, "We know from our experience at Google that data transforms every industry that it touches." And he was right. Think about when you were booking your flights or accommodation here to come to this conference and how you did that now compared with how you did it 10, 15 years ago. we believe farms will be transformed in the same, agriculture can be transformed in the same way. So yeah, just to flag that there are these new companies coming in and attempting to revolutionise and upset the status quo. Sounds great, but practically what does it look like? Got a clue about this visiting Tom Farms in northern Indiana. A large family farm, 20,000 acres, which in that part of the world is quite a big farm. And yeah, seed corn, and soybeans, because what else do you need to grow if you're in the Midwest? So what do? They're capturing data. Everything they do on farm, they're capturing. So starting from planting, and that's more detailed seeding data that we're able to capture. So that's row by row, how many seeds are going out, what is the population, what's the depth, row by row. So everything they do in farm, from planting and all the way through to harvest. And that's me sitting there inspecting their yield capture systems in their combines. And everything they do in between, they're spraying, fertilising, etc. So they capture all this stuff, and then they can put this into the Farmers Business Network, and this Farmers Business Network, you can put whatever farm data you have in there, and then you can get a benchmark service. So not only do you get all the fields from your own farm and how they've performed relative to each other, but all of a sudden you get instant feedback on how your business is performing against every other farm that's doing the same thing into this system. So what you get is a pretty interesting service that's not really been available that well to us farmers before, with kind of instant business feedback on how you're going, how your fields are performing, and what are the things that affect your business the most. Yeah, brand new business model, pretty revolutionary, and they're trying to do some interesting things. So this other possibility that got flagged to me was this supply chain disruption, and how's that going to happen with farming? And why is Amazon on the screen? Well, what did they do to the book publishing industry? They blew it up in a few years by marketing direct to consumers and going to publishers and buying the books and getting them printed and shipping them straight to consumers. No supply chain, no bricks and mortar stores. Saves a lot of money. Well, that's what turns out. While I was writing my report, I log on to this Farmers Business Network site to just check a couple of the facts that I picked up on the trip, and I see they've released a new product that they didn't tell me about when I was there. Farmers Business Network Procurement. That's exactly what they're doing. Using the information they've got in their system, they know where all the inputs need to go throughout all the continental US. Roundup, fertiliser, whatever the case is. And they're negotiating direct with input suppliers to go straight from factory to farmer, bypassing a whole dealer network. And they were claiming savings on that for their input prices of between 15 and 40%, which I think is probably marketing speak. But even if you farmers would cut all your input costs by 5 or 10%, I'm sure you'd do it. So it's a pretty interesting very interesting and disruptive business. And why is the ProductionWise logo up there? Well, just to, I guess, flag that in the grains industry anyway, we already have a product like this in Australia that's being developed, and so this stuff might seem a bit far-fetched and a bit far off, but maybe it's not as, maybe it will be happening a bit sooner than we think. What a great slide to have up there after our talk this morning. Visiting to representatives from all three of our machinery manufacturers, and just to make a couple of comments about them. When I talk to all these guys and all the other companies I've already mentioned up here, and you ask them this question, it's sort of been in the media a bit. People keep asking this thing: who owns farm data? Who owns the farmer's data? Is it the farmer themselves or the company they're working with? And it doesn't matter whether you're talking to these three guys or any of the, as I said, any of the ones I've mentioned, they all give you unequivocally variations on the same answer. And they all say farmers own the data, it's theirs, and we would never do anything that would damage our relationship with them. Legally, technically, whatever, that might be true, that might be how they view it, but it's kind of not the main game here. It's not the thing that's important. Who owns the money in your bank account? The bank does. But you don't care about that as long as when you need that money, you can access it. That's the thing you care about. And so it is with data ownership. Who can access your farm data and what are they doing with it? And that's what's important. So, and I've got a recommendation related to that in a moment. So that's the first thing. Ownership's irrelevant. Number two, they're all collecting it for roughly the same reason. They're all trying to improve, get instant feedback on what customers are doing with their machines, as opposed to what we tell them we're doing when they ask us. Helps them to pick up with problems in the manufacturing process sooner, and yeah, do their R&D. We're sort of doing the R&D research for them to an extent. And number three, and we sort of got hints of this morning, is that they're not, no matter how much Deere has tried to, it's not a data company, and they're not. And so the services that they've offered to date have been a bit frustrating to use. But what you heard about this morning, and what I'm seeing, is that these guys are kind of realising, I guess, that it's not all about green or it's not all about red. It's about trying to deliver services for farmers. And so Deere are opening up their systems and allowing others to come in. So, as I said, a bit frustrating. Things haven't always been as easy to use as we'd like them to be, but they are getting better. So where do we get to at the end of all this? And I had someone ask me at a conference a couple of weeks ago, where would we start? What's this data thing about? Why would I want to get involved? Well, I would suggest picking one thing in your business that you want to know more about and start collecting information about it. Doesn't matter particularly what it is, just something you think you've got a niggle that you're not doing quite as well as you could be, and you want to understand why that is and how you can improve. Just start collecting data on your farm about one thing. When dealing with all the companies that I've mentioned today, ask them if they're using open data standards. If something better comes along, how easy is it to shift between companies? And I see you're in the back of the room there, Richard. I think in farmer-related organisations, I think there'll be some real use in someone actually trawling through all of these complicated technical agreements that scare us farmers off a bit, and just providing a bit of plain language around them and explaining what they mean. If I found some of these things difficult to get through, most normal farmers don't have a hope, and it scares us off a bit. In the US, they have great soil and weather data that kind of underpin a lot of these new services and decision support systems that are coming. Here in Oz, we've got pretty good weather information, not quite as detailed as the US, but it's not bad. But our soil classification information here is not to the same standard that we see in the US, and some funding, some effort put into creating more consistent and reliable soil information will really help the uptake of these new technologies here in Australia. But the note to close on is the bold bit down the bottom. So the worst case scenario, if you dive in and you spend some investment on looking at a problem in your business, and you collect all your information about it, and then you look at it perhaps with the help of some expert advisors if you need to. The worst thing that can happen is you discover actually you're spot on. You're doing it perfect, you're the best in the world, no one's doing it better than you. Which A, would be a pretty cool thing to know just for your own ego. But probably what's more likely to happen is you'll find something you can improve. And that's the worst case scenario, is you'll find nothing you can improve. So that's a thought to leave you with, and then thank you all for your attention.